One small choice. One ordinary day. No one knew it would matter until years later. This is a story about kindness and what it can become. Like the video and subscribe if you believe small actions matter. The schoolyard always smelled the same at noon. Warm bread from brown paper bags, cheap pizza, sweet fruit cups, and the sharp bite of disinfectant drifting out from the cafeteria doors. Children filled the space with noise, voices overlapping, sneakers scraping against cracked concrete, laughter bouncing off the brick walls of Jefferson Ridge Elementary. For most of them, lunch recess was the best part of the day. Evan Carter sat at the end of a bench, her lunchbox unopened on her knees. She was 9 years old, small for her age, with sleeves pulled over her hands even when it wasn't cold. She usually ate quickly and quietly, saving half her sandwich if she could, just in case dinner was late or light. Today, though, she wasn't hungry. Or maybe she was, but something else was pulling at her attention. Beyond the playground, past the basketball hoop with a crooked rim, stood the chain-link fence. It separated the schoolyard from a narrow strip of sidewalk and a row of tired-looking buildings across the street. Most days, Evan barely noticed it. It was just there, like the cracks in the pavement or the faded school sign near the entrance. Today, someone was sitting on the ground outside it. At first, Evan thought it was a shadow. Then the shadow shifted, and she saw a boy about her age, maybe a little older. He was sitting with his back against the fence, knees pulled to his chest, arms wrapped tightly around them. His clothes looked too big and too thin at the same time, as if they had once belonged to someone else. One shoe was untied, the lace dragging on the dirty sidewalk. He wasn't looking at the playground. He was looking at the lunches. Evan followed his gaze. Kids tore open chip bags, traded snacks, bit into sandwiches without thinking. Juice boxes were stabbed with straws and tossed aside half full. An apple rolled across the ground and was kicked away during a game of tag. The boy swallowed hard. Evan felt something tighten in her chest. She didn't know him. She had never seen him before. Still, she couldn't look away. There was something in the way he sat, perfectly still despite the noise, like he was trying not to exist. A whistle blew. A teacher walked briskly toward the fence, her expression sharp. "You can't stay here," the teacher said, her voice carrying easily over the playground noise. "You need to move along." The boy tried to stand. His legs wobbled, and he caught himself on the fence. For a moment, Evan thought he might fall. The teacher didn't notice. She was already turning away, satisfied that the problem had been addressed. The boy sank back down, breathing hard. Evan's fingers curled around the edge of her lunchbox. Her heart was beating too fast, as if she were the one who had just tried to stand on shaking legs. She told herself to look away. It wasn't her business. Teachers handled things like that. Grown-ups did. But the boy lifted his head, just slightly, and their eyes met through the metal diamonds of the fence. He didn't look scary. He didn't look dangerous. He looked tired. His lips were dry and cracked. There was dirt on his cheek, as if he had wiped his face with the back of his hand too many times. His eyes were wide, not pleading exactly, but empty in a way that scared Evan more than begging ever could. She thought of her grandmother's voice, calm and steady, saying the same words she had heard her whole life. If you have something and someone else has nothing, you share. That's how you stay human. Evan looked down at her lunchbox. Inside was a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in wax paper, an apple with a soft spot near the stem, and a small juice pouch. It wasn't much, but it was everything she had until evening. Dinner depended on how tired her parents were and how much was left in the fridge. Her stomach twisted. She imagined sitting in class all afternoon with nothing. She imagined the hollow feeling she sometimes woke up with when dinner the night before had been too small. Then she looked back at the boy. He was watching another child unwrap a sandwich, his eyes tracking every movement. His hands trembled slightly in his lap. Evan stood up before she could change her mind. "Evan, come on!" a girl called from the swings. "We're starting a game." Evan didn't answer. She walked toward the fence, her shoes crunching softly on gravel. With every step, her heart pounded louder, as if trying to warn her to stop. Up close, the boy looked even thinner. He flinched when she stopped in front of him, clearly expecting to be yelled at again. "Hi," Evan said, her voice barely louder than a whisper. He stared at her, confused. When he tried to speak, nothing came out. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Hi. You look hungry," Evan said. The words came out simply, without accusation or pity. Just a statement. He nodded once. Evan knelt and opened her lunchbox. The hinge creaked softly. She took out the sandwich and held it through the fence. The metal was cold against her fingers. "Here," she said. "You can have this." The boy froze. He didn't reach for it right away, as if he were afraid it might disappear or turn into a trick. His eyes flicked to the schoolyard, then back to the sandwich. "For real?" he asked. Evan nodded. "It's okay." He took it with both hands. The moment the sandwich was free of the fence, he tore into it, eating fast, barely chewing. Peanut butter smeared at the corner of his mouth. Tears streamed down his face as he swallowed. Evan stayed where she was. She didn't say anything. She just watched as he finished the sandwich, then the apple, then the juice. He drank it so quickly that he coughed, pressing a hand to his chest until the fit passed. When he was done, he sat there holding the empty juice pouch, staring at it like he couldn't believe it was gone. "Thank you," he said finally. His voice cracked on the words. "What's your name?" Evan asked. "Malik," he said. "What's yours?" "Evan." The bell rang, loud and sudden. Kids groaned and lined up. Evan stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "I have to go," she said. "But I can bring you lunch again tomorrow." Malik's head snapped up. "You will?" "I promise." She turned and ran toward her class. At the door, she looked back. Malik was still sitting there, clutching the empty pouch, watching her like she might vanish if he blinked. Evan stepped inside the school, her stomach already aching, her heart heavier than it had ever been. She didn't know it yet, but the fence behind her had just become the most important place in her life. Evan woke up the next morning with a dull ache in her stomach, and the memory of Malik's eyes still sharp in her mind. For a few seconds, she wondered if yesterday had been a dream, something her imagination had filled in during a boring school day. Then she remembered the way he had eaten, fast and desperate, and the way he had said, "Thank you," like it was a word he didn't get to use very often. She sat up and listened to the sounds of the apartment. The radiator hissed unevenly. A car passed outside. Her parents were already awake, moving quietly, getting ready for work. Evan dressed and went to the kitchen, where her lunchbox sat on the counter, open and empty. Her mother stood at the sink, pouring water into a pot. "You didn't eat much yesterday," she said without turning around. "Are you feeling okay?" Evan hesitated. Her promise echoed in her head. "I promise," she swallowed. "I gave my lunch to someone," she said. Her mother turned, surprised but not angry. "To someone at school?" Evan shook her head. "Outside." There was a pause. Evan braced herself, ready for questions she didn't know how to answer. Instead, her mother nodded slowly. "Was he hungry?" "Yes." Her mother opened the cupboard and took out the loaf of bread. She made 2 sandwiches, wrapping them carefully. She handed both to Evan. "Then take these," she said. "One for you, one for him." Evan felt her throat tighten. She hugged her mother quickly before grabbing her backpack and running out the door. At school, Evan barely heard her teacher. She kept glancing at the clock, counting the minutes until lunch. When the bell finally rang, she was on her feet before anyone else. Malik was already there, sitting in the same spot by the fence, as if he hadn't moved at all since yesterday. When he saw her, his eyes widened. He stood, swaying slightly, and grabbed the fence to steady himself. "You came back," he said, disbelief and relief tangled in his voice. "I told you I would," Evan said. She pushed one sandwich through the fence, then the other. "Eat slower today." He tried. He really did. But hunger had a way of erasing good intentions. Still, when he finished, he looked better than yesterday. A little more color in his face, a little more life in his eyes. They talked after that. At first, it was only a few words. "What grade are you in? What books do you like?" Malik listened more than he spoke. Evan learned that he loved maps, that he liked tracing roads with his finger and imagining where they led. He learned that Evan wanted to be a teacher one day, maybe, or something where she could help people. The next day, she came back again. And the next. Soon, it wasn't a question. Lunch meant the fence. At home, things shifted quietly. Evan's parents noticed the extra sandwiches disappearing. One evening, her father asked gently, "Is the boy still there?" "Yes." He nodded and took on an extra shift that week. Her grandmother started slipping an extra apple into Evan's lunchbox without saying a word. No one made a big speech about it. It simply became part of the family rhythm, like paying bills late or stretching soup with water. Weeks passed. The weather changed. The air grew colder, biting through thin jackets. Malik's hands were always red. Evan started bringing gloves, then a scarf, then her old coat. When Malik protested, she shrugged and said she had another one at home. She didn't. By the time winter settled in fully, Malik's cough had become constant. One day, he didn't show up at all. Evan waited by the fence until the bell rang again, panic creeping up her spine. The next day, he was back, pale and shaking. He tried to smile, but it collapsed into a coughing fit that left him doubled over. That night, Evan went home and told her grandmother everything. The fence, the lunches, the cough. Her grandmother listened silently, then went to her room and came back with a small bottle of medicine and a thermos. "This was for us," she said. "Now it's for him." For 2 weeks, they nursed Malik through the fence. Soup poured into cups, medicine measured carefully. Evan talked to him constantly, telling stories, keeping him awake when he drifted. Slowly, his cough eased. Slowly, the color returned to his face. By the time the snow melted, Malik was no longer invisible. He laughed sometimes. He asked questions. He told Evan about his dreams, about wanting a place where no one could tell him to leave. 6 months passed like that. Quiet, steady, life-saving. On the last day, Malik told her he was leaving. Social services had found him. He tried to sound brave. Evan brought more food than ever before. They ate together, sitting on opposite sides of the fence. "I won't forget you," Malik said. "I promise." Evan pulled a blue ribbon from her hair and tore it in half. She tied one piece around his wrist and kept the other. "So you remember," she said. As she walked back to class for the last time, Evan felt the weight of something ending. She didn't know yet that something else had already begun. The morning Malik told Evan he was leaving, the sky hung low and gray, heavy with the promise of snow. Evan felt it before he said anything. There was a tension in the air, a wrongness, like the quiet just before a door closes forever. Malik stood by the fence, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He was wearing the gloves Evan had brought him weeks ago. The scarf, too, wrapped twice around his neck. He looked warmer now, healthier, but his eyes carried something new, fear, mixed with relief. "They found me," he said. Evan froze, her lunchbox halfway open. "Who?" "Social services. A lady came yesterday. She talked to me for a long time." He swallowed. They say I'm going somewhere else." Evan's heart dropped. She had known this day would come. Somewhere deep inside, she had always known. Still, it felt unreal, like someone had reached inside her chest and pulled something loose. "When?" she asked. "Today. After school." She nodded slowly, trying to understand what that meant. Today. Not someday. Not soon. Today. They sat in silence for a moment, the fence between them suddenly feeling taller than ever. Evan opened her lunchbox and pulled everything out. Not just a sandwich this time. 2 crackers. Fruit. A juice. Even a small cookie her grandmother had wrapped in a napkin that morning without explanation. Malik stared. "That's too much." "It's not," Evan said. "Eat." He did, slower than before, like he was trying to make it last. Between bites, they talked, not about big dreams this time, but about small things. The way the bell sounded when it rang too early. The crack in the sidewalk shaped like a lightning bolt. The teacher who always smelled like coffee. Neither of them said what they were really thinking. When the bell rang, Evan didn't move. Neither did Malik. "I don't know where I'm going," he said quietly. "They say it's temporary." "That's okay," Evan said, though she didn't know if it was true. "Temporary doesn't mean forever." He nodded, but his hands tightened around the fence. "I'm scared." "I know," she said, "but you're not alone anymore, even if you don't see me." He looked at her then, really looked at her, like he was trying to memorize her face. "You saved me," he said. Evan shook her head. "I just shared my lunch." "It was more than that," Malik said. "You saw me." The word stayed with her. Saw me. She hadn't thought about it that way before, but now she understood. When everyone else looked away, when adults told him to leave, when the world decided he was a problem, she had seen him as a person. Malik reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. "I wrote this," he said. "It's my name, in case you forget." Evan smiled sadly. "I won't." She hesitated, then reached up and untied the blue ribbon from her hair. It was her favorite one, faded from washing, soft at the edges. She pulled gently until it tore into 2 uneven pieces. "What are you doing?" Malik asked. "So we don't forget each other," she said. She tied one half around his wrist, carefully, making sure it wasn't too tight. "You keep this. What about you?" She held up the other half. "I'll keep mine." Malik stared at the ribbon like it was something fragile and priceless. His voice trembled. "I'll come back," he said suddenly. "One day. When I'm big. And rich." Evan laughed, a short, surprised sound that broke through the heaviness. "That's a long time from now." "I don't care," Malik said. "I promise." She smiled, even as her eyes burned. "Okay, I'll be here." The bell rang again, louder this time. Teachers were already calling students inside. Evan stood slowly. "I have to go," she said. Malik nodded. "I know." She took a few steps toward the door, then turned back. Malik was still there, standing straight now, one hand resting over the ribbon on his wrist. For the first time since she had met him, he didn't look like he was disappearing. That afternoon, Malik was gone. The fence was empty. The spot where he used to sit was just concrete and shadow. Evan stood there, long after everyone else had gone inside, staring at nothing. Life moved on the way it always does. School, homework, dinners that were sometimes enough and sometimes not. Evan grew taller. Her parents grew older. Her grandmother's hair turned white. The ribbon stayed folded in Evan's drawer, tucked away but never forgotten. For Malik, life did not become easier overnight. Foster homes came and went. Some were kind, some were not. He learned how to keep his head down, how to pack quickly, how not to get attached. Through it all, the ribbon stayed with him. On his wrist at first. Later, in his pocket. Later still, on a keychain. When things were hardest, when he felt himself shrinking again, becoming invisible, he would touch it and remember the fence, the sandwiches, the quiet voice that said, "Eat. It's okay." Someone had believed he mattered. Years passed. Then, more years. Malik grew into his promise, slowly, painfully, step by step. School became a way out. Work became a shield. Success came eventually, but peace did not. Because every time he looked at the ribbon, one question returned, sharper with time. Where is Evan? He didn't know that she had grown up carrying the same question, the same half of blue fabric, waiting for a promise she had once laughed at to find its way back to her. And neither of them knew that the distance between them was already beginning to close. 22 years after the fence, Malik Johnson woke before sunrise, in a high-rise apartment overlooking Elliott Bay. The glass walls turned the early morning light into reflections, pale blue and silver, stretching across polished floors and quiet furniture. The place was worth more than anything he could have imagined as a child. Yet it felt temporary, like a hotel room he never truly unpacked. He showered, dressed, and moved through the apartment on instinct. Coffee brewed untouched. His phone buzzed with messages about meetings, deadlines, numbers that had once felt impossible and now felt meaningless. Malik answered what needed answering, then crossed the room to a narrow shelf near his desk. A small blue ribbon lay there, faded and frayed, protected beneath clear glass. He touched it lightly, the same way he did every morning. 22 years. He had kept the promise in the only way he knew how. He had survived. He had built something from nothing. He had made himself impossible to ignore. But the promise had never been about money. Not really. It had always been about finding her. The search had started quietly. At first, Malik told himself he was just curious. A few online records, a few calls, then private investigators, school archives, property records, dead ends stacked on dead ends. Evan Carter was not an uncommon name. Families moved, records vanished. Life happened. 5 years into the search, his business partner finally asked the question everyone else avoided. "Why this city?" he said, gesturing toward a map spread across Malik's desk. Red markers clustered in one area, community centers, affordable housing projects, small developments that made little financial sense. Malik didn't answer right away. He never did. "I'm investing where it matters," he said finally. It was only half a lie. The truth was simpler and heavier. If Evan was still out there, she would be here, helping, advocating, standing between vulnerable people and a system that forgot them. That was who she had been at 9 years old. He believed she hadn't changed. That belief guided everything. On this particular morning, Malik's calendar reminded him of a meeting he usually avoided, a local housing council session. He normally sent lawyers. Today, he didn't know why, but he typed a different response. "I'll attend in person." The meeting took place in an aging municipal building near the river. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Folding chairs filled the room. Residents sat close together, arms crossed, faces tired but alert. Malik felt every eye on him as he entered. He knew what he represented to them. Developers meant disruption. Promises meant nothing. He took a seat in the back and listened. The discussion was tense. Voices rose and fell. Concerns about displacement, about broken commitments, about being pushed aside once again. Malik waited, hands clasped, listening to the fear beneath the anger. Then a voice from the middle of the room spoke. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "What guarantees do we have," the woman said, "that this won't erase the people who already live here?" Malik looked up. She stood with a notepad in her hand, confident but calm, clearly accustomed to speaking for others. There was something familiar in the way she chose her words, careful but firm. Something in the tilt of her head, in the steadiness of her gaze. His chest tightened. She continued, explaining the risks, the realities, the people who would be affected if things went wrong. She spoke like someone who had seen the consequences up close, like someone who refused to let them be ignored. Malik barely heard the rest of the meeting. His focus narrowed to her voice, her presence, the impossible pull of recognition that made no sense and yet felt undeniable. When it was his turn to speak, he stood slowly, aware of the silence settling over the room. "You're right," he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "Skepticism is earned." He answered questions, explained terms, made commitments he intended to keep. And then, without planning to, he asked, "May I know your name?" The woman hesitated, then said it. "Evan Carter." The room blurred. Malik gripped the edge of the table. Evan. The name echoed through him, colliding with memory, with the fence, with a small girl kneeling on concrete, holding out a sandwich like it was the most natural thing in the world. He forced himself to breathe. "Did you attend Jefferson Ridge Elementary?" he asked quietly. Her expression changed. Confusion flickered, followed by something sharper. "Yes," she said. "How do you know that?" The world seemed to tilt. "Do you remember?" Malik said, each word deliberate, feeding a boy through the school fence. Silence fell heavy and complete. Evan's notepad slipped from her fingers. She stared at him, her hand moving instinctively to her pocket, where something small and familiar rested. "Malik," she whispered. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the blue ribbon, its edges worn but unmistakable. "It's me," he said. "I came back." For a moment, no one moved. Then voices erupted, confusion and disbelief filling the room. Someone called for a break. Chairs scraped against the floor as people filed out, leaving space behind them. Malik and Evan stood facing each other, 22 years collapsing into a single breath. "You're alive," Evan said, her voice shaking. "So are you," Malik replied. They stepped closer, holding up the two halves of the ribbon. They fit together perfectly, as if time had never touched them. Outside the meeting room, the city moved on, unaware that a promise made by two children had just found its way home. They didn't speak at first after the room emptied. The noise faded, replaced by a quiet so complete it felt unreal. Malik and Evan stood a few feet apart, as if afraid that moving too quickly might break whatever fragile thread had brought them back together. Finally, Evan laughed softly, the sound edged with disbelief. "I used to wonder if I imagined you," she said. "Some days it felt easier to believe that than to accept you were just gone." "I wondered the same," Malik said. "But every time life got hard, I knew you were real. No one makes up kindness like that." They sat in a small office down the hall, borrowed for privacy. The walls were bare, the desk scarred with years of use. It was nothing like Malik's world of glass and steel, and yet it felt right. Honest. Grounded. "I didn't know how much it cost you," Malik said quietly. "Your family. The medicine. The coat." His voice broke. "I thought I was the only one surviving." Evan shook her head. "We didn't see it as a cost. We saw a child who needed help. That was all." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw the same steadiness he remembered, the same refusal to look away. That night, they walked out of the building together. Not hand in hand yet, but close enough to feel the warmth of each other's presence. Outside, the city lights reflected on the water, restless and alive. They talked for hours over coffee in a quiet diner, about everything and nothing, about the years between the fence and the meeting. Malik spoke of foster homes, of nights spent convincing himself not to disappear. Evan spoke of school, of choosing a career that put her close to the people most often ignored. "What do we do now?" Evan asked at last. Malik didn't hesitate. "We build something together." He showed her his plans over the following weeks, not polished presentations, but ideas shaped by memory and need. Housing tied to education, work tied to dignity, support that didn't vanish when paperwork ended. Evan challenged him, refined the vision, insisted on voices from the community shaping every decision. They called it the Blue Ribbon Project. Evan became its director, not because of what Malik offered, but because she understood the problem from the inside. Malik provided resources, connections, and something equally important: restraint. He listened. He followed. The first year was exhausting. Meetings ran long. Funding had to be stretched. Mistakes were made and corrected, but lives changed, one by one, then in clusters. Young people found stability, found direction, found proof that being seen could happen more than once in a lifetime. Through it all, Malik and Evan found their own rhythm. Dinners turned into long walks. Long walks turned into shared silences that didn't need filling. The promise they had laughed about as children no longer felt childish. It felt patient. One evening, standing near the old school fence that still cut across the block, Malik took out the ribbon. It was barely holding together now, fibers thinning with age. "It did its job," Evan said softly. He smiled. "So did you." They tied a new ribbon to the fence, bright against the metal, and stepped back. A symbol, not of the past, but of continuity. As they walked away, a child stood nearby, watching them with the same quiet attention Evan once had. Evan noticed first. She knelt, offering a gentle smile. "Are you hungry?" she asked. The child nodded. Evan reached into her bag and pulled out a sandwich. Malik watched as history folded in on itself, not repeating, but continuing. The fence remained. So did the choice. And this time, they made it together. Sometimes changing a life starts with simply seeing someone. If this story touched you, like and subscribe. Comment where you're watching from.